Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Today, Melissa and I are really excited because we have a super special guest. We have Rachel Stack. She is the Chief Academic Officer for the Humanities team at Great Minds. She brings so much joy and enthusiasm and wit and wisdom to every single project that she works on at Great Minds, and her hand touches everything there. So she's going to talk about a really special project that is happening currently at Great Minds. Melissa, I know you're here with me too. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to have Rachel today. First, because she's like a super fan of our podcast from the beginning. So that's exciting. But yeah, the topic she'll talk about today is just so timely with where we are and trying to have students learn at home. So I'm really excited to hear about what you guys are doing at Great Minds.
Yeah, Rachel, welcome. So we know that you started out as a teacher I think almost every guest on our podcast. So welcome to the podcast. Will you tell us a little bit about you and how you started and what you currently do? We are so excited that you're here.
Thanks, Melissa and Lori. I'm so excited too because, as you said, I'm a super fan. I've been listening from the beginning. I think I've listened to every podcast, and I love your questions. I love your topics. I'm always really interested in hearing your guests. So I'm very honored to join the ranks of other guests at Melissa and Lori Love Literacy.
Yeah.
And yes, I started as a teacher right out of undergrad. I taught in New York City and then for a few years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then I spent a few years at Scholastic Education, which I loved before coming to Great Minds. But Great Minds is really the perfect home for me because I always say it combines my love of being a classroom teacher with my love of beautiful books and rich content, which I learned a lot about when I was working at Scholastic. And I learned a lot about publishing, and I had incredible mentors there. So coming to Great Minds, I was able to really bring both of those things into my day-to-day life, which is, what does it mean to be a great teacher? And what is the great, rich content out there that teachers need? And so at Great Minds, I feel like we bring those two things together. And I've been really lucky to have the experience that allows me to do that every day at Great Minds.
Yeah. Well, we're so thrilled that you're here. You've been on our list for quite some time to ask, and it just seems like the perfect time to ask you now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are really at a moment, as you said, Lori, in that sweet and lovely introduction. Thank you. We're at a moment of really asking ourselves, what does distance learning look like? And I think that looks like a lot of things for a lot of different teachers and a lot of different families. Schools are, I think, beginning to think about themselves as like maybe in the future, they're learning centers where students are checking in. Right now, we're not sure what happens face to face or Zoom to Zoom, or even what platforms are the right ones to use. I think educators are really worried about how do we check in, right? And how do we continue to build knowledge? And are we following a coherent curriculum in this kind of fractured space?
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking about all of their populations, right? What does this space mean for English learners and students with special needs? So when we found ourselves in that moment all together in mid-March, Great Minds were a team of teachers. And so we decided, okay, we have to adapt as teachers do, right? That's what teachers do. And whatever happens in the classroom, whatever happens in the community, teachers think on their feet. And so we decided it was really important for us to think about how our incredibly rich content needed to be adapted and put out there as a tool for teachers who are thinking about all these different environments, all these different needs. So yeah, that was kind of our first thing, like how do we adapt?
Yeah.
And what can we do to put that forward so that teachers have tools?
Yeah. And I have to just say, from sitting here like in Baltimore City, watching, decisions being made about what's going to happen, I was just so impressed at how quickly this knowledge on the go came out as a support for our school. Like, I don't even think I expected it. Not to underestimate you guys, but, just like within I don't know how long it was actually, Rachel, but like a week or so, that you guys actually had content up and ready for our students was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really did take about a week for us to think, first, okay, what are we going to do, right? What is Knowledge on the Go? And so we started with the idea that we knew we needed to provide resources for Eureka Math, which is one of the most widely used math curricula in the country, for Wit and Wisdom, which is widely used in Baltimore and across the country, and for PhD Science, our science curriculum, and finally for Geodes, our readable texts for our K1 and 2 students. So first in that week, we said, okay, what is this? What is this going to be? And we thought about the fact that the virtual space was not the classroom. So we couldn't just get on a screen and,
do
go through the lessons, right? So we spent some time thinking through that. We also had to think really carefully about how English language arts translates into a virtual space, because you both know really well, everyone knows the heart of an ELA classroom is the text and the conversation and the writing that happens around that. And so Knowledge on the Go, we knew very quickly would be, an adaptation of our content. It needed to be the kind of experience where students were able to think and engage, but obviously the teacher isn't directly engaging with them. And we had to think about the fact that what we were putting out there into the world had to be focused on the texts, and kids may not have the texts. So we sort of unpacked those big 3 challenges in our moment of how do we adapt? And I think we were able to move so quickly, Melissa, because we spent a couple of days outlining answers to those questions. And then we thought a lot about the fact that we know a lot about the virtual space, because Great Minds is a really diffuse organization. We work with teachers all across the United States. So we have some brick and mortar offices. We have a headquarters in DC, but most of us work on the screen all day, right? Most of us work on Zooms with teachers, with each other, with our full-time staff, with our part-time staff, with consultants, with experts, with researchers. We're always in this space. And so just as adult humans working together, we had thought a lot in the course of building out our culture about how people work together remotely. And so we realized we could leverage some of what we know about this. We're really good at working remotely. We think about it all the time. We've built a very clear culture around it. So I think that helped our speed also, Melissa. And then the last thing I think that made us really agile is we have this really powerful philosophy around project management on our team at Great Minds. Our project managers, they do what all good project managers do, people with project management certifications around planning out an effective schedule and a good workflow. But we have these project managers who deeply, deeply understand our projects and our content and our people, and they never see anything impossible. They don't see any barriers. They figure out, how do we solve this challenge? Part of that, as I said, with adaptation is that they're educators, and they're just extraordinary planners and extraordinary problem solvers. So I think the reason we were able to be so fast, to answer your question, is those 3 things. We're okay, we're teachers, we have to adapt. We're teachers who do this virtually all the time. What do we know about that? And we have a system for how we think about tackling big problems like this. The country is closed. How do we get something out quickly? Because kids still need to keep learning. They need to connect. The teachers need tools to keep making those connections and reaching those kids.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. And also, I want to reinforce that Natalie Wexler had an article in Forbes, trying to see the title of it, 7 Tips to Help Make Remote Learning More Effective. And it came out April 8th. Obviously, we're all past that now. But she said, focus on content, not skills, not comprehension skills. And so I think that, just from being engaged in Knowledge on the Go, that's really what has made Knowledge on the Go special and different. And I know that Jared Miracle had posted something on Twitter, and Rachel, I think it stood out to you. Do you want to share a little bit about that and make that connection? Because I think it fits just so supremely with Natalie's point in her article. And we quote Natalie all the time. We're super fans of her. So
yeah, likewise.
She really has such incredible, incredibly researched stuff that she puts out there in a very accessible way. And so I thought these tips were really timely, and also just just really meaningful to the Knowledge on the Go project and that one in particular. So you want to talk about that?
I'd love to. Yeah. Cause Jared Miracle's post really, really struck me. There's so much great work on Curriculum Matters. That group just has fantastic research-based and very practical, topics that they write about. And so I follow them often. And Jared Miracle's post, he talks about how in this time, knowledge-rich curriculum or knowledge-building curriculum, like Wit and Wisdom, I think he said it travels well, which to your point, I think it travels well for a couple of reasons. Like Natalie said, there's a couple of things that are really important when you're doing virtual learning. One is text, right? You have to have like an anchor in the content. And, even if the kid has the text in front of her, thank goodness, because that's the best situation. But if not, our virtual teachers have thought really carefully on how do we keep the focus on the art or the novel or the nonfiction text, through read aloud, through good, fair use recognition of our publishers, but through showing illustrations. So I think it travels well, as Jared Miracle said, because one, and as Natalie said, there's really rich text that like everyone can go to. It levels the playing field. Two, we had to decide like how to keep it simple, as Natalie said, like we're not doing our full coherent learning design. So what are some of the key things that we know we want our virtual learners to take away from experiencing a Knowledge on the Go lesson? And a lot of that comes from these practices, right, that we help our learners do to get to knowledge. So Jared Miracle was talking about, not drilling isolated skills-based instruction, because who's going to tune into Knowledge on the Go to hear about like finding the main idea? Nobody becomes a teacher to find the main idea. No one goes to school to find the main idea. But when you're fascinated by a topic or you're fascinated by a text, you find the main idea. And in fact, you're going to do better at finding the main idea because you do things and you can bootstrap your main idea, as Marilyn Adams says, on all the vocabulary and knowledge that you build. So we were following Natalie's point about like, you got to decide, what is the big deal here. And our virtual teachers decided, using our content and craft stages and our core practices. And those are practices that the students engage in all the time, every day with every text. And they're ways of questioning. They're like an inquiry framework that builds to knowledge. So they start with noticing and wondering. Then they organize, which is basically what's happening in this text. Then they reveal. They do a deeper look at something. Then they distill, which is like, what's the big picture, right? What's the essential meaning? And then the last question they really ask themselves, or sets of questions, is how does this contribute to my knowledge of this particular topic or my knowledge of the world? So Wit and Wisdom has these practices embedded in what kids do every day. So if kids are logging in to Knowledge on the Go, that's a familiar practice. Like if they know Wit and Wisdom. If they're not, if they've never seen Wit and Wisdom before, but their teachers are using these free tools because they're free to everybody, they have these practices that now they can start to apply to the text. I think a third thing we thought about, which we always think about at Great Minds, is coherence. And Natalie gets at this a little bit too. And I think this is part of the traveling well, is that anything you do in an instructional space, and you guys know this because you're excellent teachers, there has to be a coherent build, right? There's no room for just random bits of teaching, right? It has to have a plan and it has to be mapped. And so we thought about like from the beginning to the end, right? What's going to happen when a kid goes through module 4 virtually? What are really the big anchors? And again, we went back to our content and craft practices that are in our curriculum. And then lastly, like this gets at traveling well also is, the audience, sort of the purpose, the intentionality of the fact that if you're a kid logged on to Knowledge on the Go, it's not your teacher in front of you, unless you're lucky enough to be in like Kier Butt's classroom in Baltimore, or, we have teachers all over the country. It might be your teacher, right? So you may be watching your teacher, because as I said before, we're a team of teachers, and so many of the virtual teachers who are doing Knowledge on the Go are teachers across the country, right? Who just implement the curriculum, and now they're doing it for everybody, not just their kids. Yeah. But you're not engaging, right? You're not in that kind of like brick and mortar human teacher experience. So we had to really think about like, what's our intention? How can we make a connection? And, I told our virtual teachers very early on, like, do what you would do in your classroom. Like, be goofy, be funny, be smart. Like, you're all great teachers. Like you're in a virtual space, and I know it's not the same thing, but there are all of these moments when you watch the lessons where you can just tell like that person is a teacher, and that person is making a connection with this, kid out there who she's never met, just in her language, in her love for the topic, in her love for the content. And I think that comes through really in all the subjects. I see it so much in the Eureka lessons, because those folks love math. And you can just feel it, when you're watching the lesson. So yeah, I think it travels well, to Jared's point, because it applies some of those things Allie was talking about in terms of like the focus on the text, the simplicity of what we're trying to accomplish, the coherence, and then just the intentionality of the audience that is not directly in front of you, but is directly in front of you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys, one of the great things about, you said this kind of already about ELA in general, and especially Wit and Wisdom, is that like having discussions with other people about a text and engaging with your teacher, and, how do you do, and writing about the text too. So how is that happening in a knowledge on the go situation? I know it's like impossible.
Nothing is impossible.
Well, not impossible. It's very difficult.
You have to meet our project managers. They'll quickly disavow that mission. But no, that's a great question, Melissa. I mean, I think it's happening in two ways. The virtual teachers, they pause for two things. They pause for sort of like they'll pose that content framing question, whether it's notice and wonder or organize or reveal or distill or know, and then it's kind of, they don't want to do that door explorer thing where it's like, yes, you're right, but they follow the question then with possible answers that are all really knowledge rich. So even though they can't build, as good listeners do, on what the speaker said, they build on the knowledge, right? So they just sort of like put it out there in that kind of modeled way. Mm-hmm. The other thing that they do in those spaces is something we've been calling like knowledge nuggets, for lack of a better word. They really take the kinds of things that they know kids are going to hook into. And they do a little bit of like, I've been calling it like Sage on the Stage or fireside chat approach, which, is in this space, like, again, without that collaboration, Melissa, we're trying to get these moments where I can really talk about, who is Napoleon, or where's the Southern Hemisphere, or what is blubber, or, these kinds of things. I'm thinking about Shackleton. It's one of our...
I think Lori's daughter had a couple nuggets that she came out with.
Oh, you tell us about those, Lori. She found some nuggets in her experience with the lessons.
Yeah, Presley's doing the full grade 2 suite.
Great.
Loves Mr. Waldorf. If you're listening for Eureka Math, she loves you. She loves Miss Clemens for Wit and Wisdom. And she loves Miss Lorraine. We say Miss Lorraine because it's hard for her to say Miss Lorraine's last name for geodes. And she's doing the full suite. And I have to say, the funniest moment so far was when she came in to wake me up at like 6:30 one morning. And she leaned over the bed and she said, "So what's the difference between your rectum and your anus?" And I just like
had done her geodes work.
She's doing grade 2, focused on good nutrition,
good eating.
Yeah. And working on the different body systems and talking about digestion, and it has just been like Jared is correct. It does travel well. It travels exceptionally well. And I mean, even today, she was rolling around on the sofa, laughing hysterically, reading the new geodes. Did you know that cows have 4 stomachs? Can you imagine having 4 stomachs? Each one. And that's the stuff that kids love, not, the worksheet that says, can you find an idea of this article? Right. That's the stuff that they bring with them and that they remember. And, when it's just really, really special, those knowledge nuggets that you're referring to. I love that, by the way. That's what I think what really draws that piece that draws kids in. And regardless of the fact that they don't have, potentially someone to talk to or that conversation, they still have opportunities to build knowledge and then also export it via writing opportunities or even interaction. Like I've seen her, somebody will say, the teacher will say it out loud, and she'll be saying it, or they'll say it really low, or whisper it to me, or give me a thumbs up, or stand up. And I mean, she does it all. So, it's a little different in middle school. They're not probably whispering to the screen, but
but they are engaging. And I love it that Presley's able to do knowledge on the go on her iPad or her laptop. But we have to talk about access, right? Because equity, of course, is a huge issue right now. The achievement gap is only going to get wider, right? Because we have kids that don't have that safety network of school, and they don't have that person in their teacher who is often a hugely consistent force in their life.
Yes.
And so we also have thought really intentionally about how our knowledge on the go content can be distributed in what we're calling our TV classrooms. Mm-hmm. So we've been working with PBS affiliates and with local access stations. So Melissa, I don't know if you've seen it in Baltimore, but the city schools, public access station is broadcasting. And then we have all these different affiliates all over the country who are, tapping into the content. We basically, deliver it and they broadcast it if it, fits into their programming. So public access stations in Baltimore City and Montgomery County, Shelby County, DC, Cincinnati, they're broadcasting. And so what that means for access is those kinds of experiences that Presley's having. We want kids who don't have a device and don't have an internet connection to also be able to tap into. It's, not every kid has a TV, right? I mean, we just have huge issues all over the place, but we figured that with PBS and the public access partnerships, we were at least, cutting a little bit into that access problem by removing the need for a device or an internet connection. Also, there's a lot of situations we know of where, maybe there's a phone and there's 3 kids. And so, or there's a computer and there's 3 kids and mom needs the computer for work also. Yeah. So, just the idea of at least putting them out there on PBS so that all kids can have the kinds of experiences that Presley's having, even if they don't have an iPad or a connectivity or a laptop or a Chromebook.
Yeah, and I haven't tuned in yet to the public access, but I've seen the schedule, and even that just saw there were several times that the second grade one was showing. I was like, that's really awesome. That it's not just one time and you missed it, but you actually get a lot of chances to see it. So.
Yeah, and we've heard, some of our partners, I appreciate your point of the schedule, because some of our partners have told us things like, I've got a second grader and a fourth grader, and the fourth grader will watch with the second grader and, help. And then the second grader will watch with the fourth grader and be like, what's the American Revolution? Or that's module 3, but, what's going on in your lesson? So there's a schedule, and then there's also this kind of, multi-grade view that people can get if they are able to watch, multiple episodes on PBS or watch multiple, knowledge on the go lessons if they do have connectivity and they can engage in virtual learning.
So it sounds like a lot of people are actually using this. Do you have statistics for how many places and people are logging in and seeing these?
We do. Yeah, it's really the need is there, right? And again, back to we knew that people really needed this. And so I just, I looked at our average watches per day today, and they're pretty impressive numbers. We have about 92,000 Eureka Math watches.
And that, Rachel, is that just for overall or this week or this day or what?
I think this is average per day.
Average per day. Okay. Perfect.
And Wit and Wisdom's in the 70,000s, Geode's 14,000. So, several thousand people are logging on, and they're, using them, I think, in a bunch of different ways. We're also global, which was kind of exciting to me that, most of our sessions are in the US. But we have a couple thousand sessions in Mexico and Canada and South Africa,
Nice.
a couple hundred in India and Australia and South Korea and the UK. So we were excited to see that, not only our most trusted partners who, we know are implementing wit and wisdom like Baltimore, Cincinnati, also like they're out there as knowledge-rich resources across the globe, which is pretty exciting.
I think that just the access that Great Minds has provided has been astounding when you consider, the knowledge on the go in terms of, access through the internet or through PBS. But I know that it's more than just knowledge on the go, because I saw vocabulary on the go pop up. Can you talk a little bit about not just access in terms of internet access or TV access? Can you talk about access for all students and how vocabulary on the go also meets the needs of all learners, is supporting that?
Yeah, Lori, thank you for asking that, because when we talk about access, at the top of our conversation, we were also talking about how districts are they think all the time, right, about their English learners, they think about their special needs learners, they think about kids reading below grade level, and they think about that when they have them right in front of them, right, physically, and are connecting every day. So thinking about them in this distant space it's a whole nother layer. And we hear a lot like, oh, wit and wisdom is really hard. It's too hard for our English learners, and it's too hard for our struggling readers. So we think about this a lot because, our learning design is really intentional to support all learners. So what we did with vocabulary on the go, which is a component of every knowledge on the go lesson, is we reached out. Well, really was the vision of Sarah Webb, who I mentioned earlier, is our real teacher. We're all teachers, but she's a teacher in Bad River, Ohio. And she has, a huge English learner population. She's been teaching wit and wisdom for several years to her ELs. And so when we talked about what can we do, right? What can we do to support our English learners, we went to what we know is really true, and that is language development is super critical for everybody. So what happens before every knowledge on the go lesson is there's a 10-minute preview of 3 to 5 really highly portable words. So these are words that are really important for the topic, right, of the content. They're content area words, and they're academic words, right? So words that have a lot of portability in the academic setting, things like analyze and annotate and portray. So our EL teachers, Sarah Webb and some others, Heidi Foley, who's a Baltimore teacher.
Yay, Baltimore!
They think about these words, right? They connect them with the other virtual teacher, right, who's doing the full lesson. And then they do a preview of those words in English and Spanish with images and context, right? So they say, okay, here's the word, here's the meaning, here it is in English, here it is in Spanish. We have an extraordinary advisor who's doing some quick vocal coaching with them, language coaching, accent coaching, because none of our teachers, I think right now, are native speakers. They're all studiers of the Spanish language. So we have a native speaker working with them. And so basically what vocabulary on the go does is it's another way for us to actualize a really core belief of our learning design, which is that if you spend time really previewing and thinking thoughtfully about the language before the lesson as well as during the lesson, then you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck for both those who are developing the language and for all of us, right, who have to think about the importance of the vocabulary and the relationship of that language to the topic, to the building of the knowledge. So vocabulary on the go has been our response to one aspect of how we can support English learners, how we can support deeper language development, and how we can translate what we know about really great instruction into that virtual space. So previewing those words, thinking about their portability, working through the morphology and the word families, thinking about the image. All of that is what happens in a wit and wisdom classroom. So vocabulary on the go is just like a 10-minute distillation of that before the learner engages in the full lesson.
We didn't talk about this beforehand, Rachel, so I'm just throwing this out there to you, but you have me thinking
nothing's impossible. Nothing's impossible.
Nothing's impossible. That sounds super helpful, whether school is what we normally do or this. Yeah. I'm just wondering, are the wheels turning at Great Minds about, what are we learning from this that we can continue in the future?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that because, yes, I think another really big part of our culture, and this will not surprise you since I said we're a team of teachers, is we are always learning and we're always really wanting to be in like continual improvement and continual learning. And so we're doing a couple of things. We're asking ourselves like, yeah, what does this teach us about what we need, what we want to make next for supporting teachers? What does it teach us about how we continue to do our implementation success and our coaching, with our teachers? And how good are we at it right now? And how do we make it better next time around? So the wheels are really turning in like what we might build right later, how we will continue to support later. And also like Sarah Webb was saying to me, like, gosh, today's knowledge on the go is so much better than like 3 days ago, right? Because, we are adapting, right? We, like everybody else, are taking that great practice, right, that happens in wit and wisdom classrooms when you're all together in a room and translating it to the virtual space. And yeah, thanks, Melissa. We're thinking a lot about like, how do we do this well now? What does it tell us about what we want to do later in building out more supports for our teachers and our learners?
Yeah. Are you getting any feedback from districts about what they're loving or any that are doing it really successfully that you're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. We want to highlight this and we want to definitely tap into this in the future, or anything that you want to share from what you've heard from the partners?
I do. Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think one of the most exciting things that we've heard, this is just like, I'll tell you one quick story from North Carolina, is students responding to the virtual teacher. So like, reaching out through, a parent or their teacher from their actual school and saying, I've been, watching Miss Tanisha. It's like what you were saying about Presley falling in love with her Eureka teacher and with Miss Lorraine. And so we got recently a text from a colleague in North Carolina that was, it was, a written response that a student had done because, as I said before, that there are the stop and dots and some of the writing that virtual teachers pause so that students can create that. So they've actually received some like artifacts, right? This particular one was from North Carolina, and they wanted to know if our colleague was Tanisha's friend because she had made such a connection to Tanisha Spears, who's one of our virtual teachers. So the colleague had texted this image and said, like, basically, like, do you know her? I really like her. I want to know if you're friends. And it was such a beautiful, like, human, moment. So that a lot of students are actually, they're doing the work, right? Which is it's a pretty dicey thing in a virtual learning space. And my husband is a high school teacher and, he's working on his virtual learning. Like, are they doing it? And he's amazing. He's got great systems, but, he worries about it because you're worrying about your kids' progress and their lives and their engagement, like when they're right in front of you.
Right.
But when they're not, it's a whole other story. So we've seen some artifacts. That's been one of the coolest things is people have reached out and said, look at what my child did, or, look at what the student did while sitting in your virtual lesson. So we've loved that. We also loved the way that, and of course, I'm now going to talk about Baltimore, that, leadership in Baltimore, they were really one of the first partners who reached out and said, we want to put this on public access, has really thought about the issue of access and the issue of making these available as widely as possible and with some corresponding supports, right? Like our student editions or the texts themselves. So we are also seeing a lot of movements and efforts for districts and leaders to actually get the texts in hand. Some implementations have arranged for things like kids will go for a food pickup and they'll get the text, or they'll get a student edition, or they sent them home on March 13th when everything shut down, or, so the other thing that we've really appreciated is seeing partners that have really thought about like, it's going to look really different for so many kids. That's part of the problem, right? That's part of the equity issue. So, how can we think about making sure that kids have things in hand or on TV, or that, they can keep a level of engagement moving.
Yeah. I have to tell you a super quick little story. It's really little, but on my Facebook group for my neighborhood, there was a parent who said that she ordered I think it was the Alvin Ailey book, I don't know which grade level that is, but she ordered it and she got an extra one. She got an extra one and put it out to the neighborhood of like, hey, does anyone need this for their student? And I was just like so touched by it.
That is great. Yeah. Because the books are so rich. One of the things that we know is, powerful, back to the sort of like, how do you keep it simple, is just engaging with these texts for now has some power. Right.
Yeah.
It's not as powerful as if they're engaging with a great teacher and if they're in a, coherent knowledge building curriculum from, the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But just knowing that they have a beautiful text to engage with. Again, that could be in front of them. If they're lucky, they have it in hand, or it could be through this virtual teacher reading it aloud and then stopping for some of those knowledge nuggets, stopping to talk about some of those specific things and asking a question and then modeling some answers and then asking them to jot down, a response to a prompt. That it's a very, it's not a classroom like we know it, but it's still, we're hoping will have some power for kids' knowledge, for their engagement, for their passions. Maybe there's someone who, now really loves Alvin Ailey and wants to study Alvin Ailey's life and artistry and what it means to be an artist and a choreographer and how do artists make art. That's the module that comes from. It's a grade 3 module about how and why artists make art. So yeah, I think so. Just to summarize, I think from Baltimore to North Carolina, all the way across the country, we're seeing kids connect, like Presley with her teachers, and we love that. And then we're seeing districts think about like, we know that this is not an equitable experience for all, but how can we create supports for our families and our teachers and our kids so that there is an engagement that does have power, and even though there's some variation to it.
Yeah. I want to call out too that Great Minds did a little bit of support there for that equity piece, because every text is read aloud. And
That's right.
That is something really important to name, right now during this podcast.
Right.
Because if students don't have access in that part where you mentioned that you spent a couple days doing a lot of planning, that's a huge hurdle. I feel like other organizations would have said they don't have the text. This is impossible. We can't do this. But you went forward and kept on, brainstorming a way to provide access. And the fact that every single book is read aloud to students provides access. So I think that that's a huge piece of it too. And also really exciting and that teacher interaction.
Yeah. And they're such great teachers. Like I was saying earlier, the math teachers are so engaging to watch. The science, oh my gosh, I love watching our science teachers. They're so into it. And when you watch our virtual teachers read aloud, a great read aloud is a great thing. And, when you're in a classroom and you're a part of a great read aloud, whether you're in 6th grade or 2nd grade, a teacher who's like fascinated by the topic and like is a great reader is a powerful thing. So yeah, we made the decision very early on that not all kids are going to have the text in front of them. And so how can we create really beautiful read alouds? And obviously in middle school, there are sort of chunks that then accumulate. And in the lower grades, they're full books. And with geodes, the read aloud geodes are readable texts for K1 and 2 that are aligned to Foundation's phonics scope and sequence. So they're really intended for independent reading, so that students can practice their sound spelling patterns with connected text. But our read alouds of our geodes are such a powerful support. I know Presley was loving the good ED text in module 4 for grade 2. Yeah. It's a powerful support, again, back to sort of access that, and kids are going to have real gaps, especially in their phonics learning. People are talking a lot about what do we do about interrupted learning? And obviously foundational skills are going to be one of the most important places for K2 teachers to work out, using DIBELS or whatever quality assessment they use, like where are their gaps in K1 and 2? How do we address them? Which is what K1 and 2 teachers do all the time with phonics learning. But happily, they can put geodes in wherever their kid is, like wherever the learning was interrupted. There's a geode there, and
did
there's
I say
a
that
Lorraine reading it aloud.
Can you access the geodes, actually the actual text too?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I thought I saw that.
Yeah, so we have geodes on the go as well. So when you think about our knowledge on the go universe, as I said, all 3 subjects, right? Eureka, Wit and Wisdom, and PhD, and then within the Wit and Wisdom world, we have geodes. And we have knowledge on the go, which are lessons. Then we have vocabulary on the go, as Lori pointed out, for that sort of preview of language development in English and Spanish. We have geodes on the go, which are ebooks, right, of the texts that align with this particular module. Right now, everybody's in module 4 at this point in the year.
Yeah.
And
can I jump in? I wish that I said it on episode 9 with Lorraine and Emily, and I'll say it again right here. I wish that this podcast was not just audio, because if I could hold up a geodes book,
show a geode.
To show it, right? Like, if you're listening to this podcast and you're hearing us talk about geodes and you've never seen it, please pause, go to greatminds.org, look up Knowledge on the Go, and click on either K1 or 2 and find yourself a geodes book and then read it, because it is so special. And I mean, every time I read a geodes, I get goosebumps. So just to like plug that, I feel like
a lot of knowledge in there. A lot of knowledge.
So yeah,
a lot of knowledge in there. So
like everybody.
Yeah. I might read some to Elliot and he won't even know what's going on. But
and he'll start to ask you really good questions about like rectums and anus. Yeah.
1-year-old.
The other resource, both in math and wisdom, math fluency is obviously really important, and fluency in reading is critical. And so we believe in fluency practice in wisdom K8. It's really critical.
I could not love you guys more for that.
It's powerful. It's really powerful. And so there are some resources up also, a Knowledge on the Go about fluency work at home. Because, everyone's talking a lot about like parents aren't teachers and parents can't be teachers. And we all know, the realities of parents working from home. We know the realities of, parents who are out there on the front lines, right, who are not working from home and can't, and aren't. And also we know the realities that, parents are not trained and, to be teachers, unless you're the 3 of us, for example, our poor kids. My son always jokes about, like, he's like, I have 2 English teachers as parents. It's awful. He's a freshman in high school. So that question of like parents as teachers, like the fluency supports are to help them understand, like, here is what your child is doing right now. Like, and it's not that you have to be their teacher, but you can just listen, right, to their fluency work, which is what happens anyway. And when wisdom, it comes home as homework. So it's just some tips for parents as their kids are engaging in that fluency work, K8, so that they have an idea about why that's so important and what they can do. Because I do think that's a huge part of this moment too, right? Parents, trying to work out what to do with knowledge on the go, or whatever other resource is in front of them. One of the things that, we want to be helpful is it is a very, it is not a synchronous experience. Like, there's not like a teacher connecting with your child, as I said before, but it is something that your child can do independently for the most part. In K1 and 2, obviously there's a lot of caveats on that, but they can watch, right, the lesson and listen and ask the questions and say it out loud and whisper it and write down answers. So it is an instructional experience. And so when we think about parents who are trying to make this work, that was something else that we considered, that it's something that they can let their kid do, right? They can just engage, with Miss Lorraine for a little while. So we're hoping that is a support for parents. And I do think the other reason that knowledge travels well, as Jared Miracle said, is, like I said, I know parents can't be teachers, but parents are kids' earliest teachers, and parents are teachers. I mean, like when you think about my grandmother taught me everything I know about cooking. Like she was my cooking teacher, right, for my whole life. And there are things that you're teaching your kids all the time. And so having knowledge-rich topics, you can just talk about them. And in many ways, you're being a teacher. So if a parent just downloads our free parent tip sheets, there's like 5 questions, on like every rich topic that their child is engaging in. So can use those parent tip sheets, and just when you're having dinner or when you're cooking dinner or when you're flying in from your job and sanitizing everything, like you can just ask questions about the topics. And in that way, you are being a teacher, right? Not in the same way that someone who's, trained and focused on education at all hours of the day and night, but you are being a teacher. And so we also want parents to hear that message, like, don't beat yourself up. Ask some really good questions about some really rich topics. Find out what topics your kids love. Have them, read more on that. Have them write more on that. Download podcasts on that. And just like you can, really helping parents think about like the way we build knowledge is by reading deeply on a topic. And so if your kids can do that, that's a real win.
Yeah, Lori and I talked about that in a couple of podcasts back when this first happened, and we were thinking before Knowledge on the Go even started, right. What do we do? Yeah. What do parents do? And that's always
that was the schools are closed one, right?
Yeah,
and Knowledge on the Go just had come out, and I was so excited for it, but it wasn't. I think I had just had a little bit experience with Presley, so nothing to the extent that we have now. 6 in, which is incredible.
Yeah. I know.
And it just makes so much sense for where parents can help, and it's a huge help for their reading. It's. I think some people might think it's not enough, right? That they should be doing questions like they're going to see on some state test one day, but this is huge.
Well, and I would love for it to be, a good outcome to this crazy time, for people to think about, like, the reason you go to school is to learn about topics and things and build your knowledge. The reason you learn to read, it's not some you learn to read to know. The reason you learn to write is to communicate and articulate what you know. Yeah. And so I think it's often shocking to parents when they learn that, like, well, my student's not studying a novel in ELA or a topic. They're doing worksheets, right, on main idea for 2 weeks, and then inference, and then author's purpose. And one day they're reading about a boy and his dog. The next day they're reading about geysers. The next day they're reading about, the Pony Express. Like, I think it's kind of surprising to a lot of adults and parents to think like, oh, so they're not studying like a novel or a nonfiction or a topic. They're not studying some content.
Like something coherent. Right?
Yeah. So I'm hoping that if more parents are thinking about, like, oh, okay, what's a book that my child is into, and how can I ask questions or tell them things I know about that time period in history or that topic, or that something that might come out of this is for parents to really be looking at what their kids are doing and thinking about it more as ending in knowledge. Skills are a huge important part of knowledge, but the skills have to happen embedded within the knowledge. And I don't know if maybe, having the opportunity to look more at what's happening in kids learning will help parents be able to think about how important that is.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, it's not necessarily an either or, that it's really a both and it's, just kind of sprinkled throughout the knowledge, but the knowledge is paramount, and the knowledge is really the undergird. Could you share a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I'll go back to the main idea example that I was using earlier, that kids in wisdom learn that skill. They learn the skills of explicit writing instruction, right? Topic sentences and details and Oxford commas. And, they learn both the grammar and, the syntax, as well as like the craft of writing. So, all of those skills are really important. What happens often, though, is they're completely divorced from a rich topic level study. They're kind of divorced from knowledge, and they're treated, as the thing, as the learning, as the curriculum. And so what we believe very much in terms of how we approach the design of Wit and Wisdom, and of course this lives in Knowledge on the Go, is that you build those skills for, all of the things that happen as a reader, and you build those writing skills explicitly, but it happens through the deep study of knowledge. That, as you said, Laura, it's not an either or, it's their companions. And I mentioned our content stages and our craft stages earlier, and our core practices, which are annotation and questioning and gathering evidence and summarizing. So through the content stages, the craft stages, which are questions, right? It's a core practice of questioning. And other core practices, we want people to think about, like, all of that, the end goal is knowing something. It's like the reason we call them practices is, I think, like, I know Melissa and I both love yoga. Like, yoga is your practice that you do for like enlightenment, health, well-being, mindfulness, right? That's my practice. That's to get that. So similarly, the skills and the questioning and all of that is a practice towards getting to knowledge, right? The reason you do all that, you don't just find the main idea to find a main idea. You don't just annotate to annotate. You're trying to build your knowledge about a topic. And so why don't we think about what's happening in a virtual space and what's happening in a brick and mortar space as all built coherently around knowledge? And you're not going to build it all, but there's huge, Marilyn Adams' research I mentioned earlier on bootstrapping, like you build a base of some knowledge and that transfers then builds out your schema. And then, the more you know, it's like that, what was that great G.I. Joe thing I'm aging myself, but like growing up with like G.I. Joe public service announcements, they say knowing is half the battle. Right? So skills are in there, but it's like they have to be together in the battle. Like knowing has to be it's both the starting point and the end.
Yeah. And that reminds me of
together in the battle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's then
that's the name of this podcast. We just named it.
Knowing on the go is half the battle.
Oh, I like that. So you're gonna have to rebrand.
See if we can get a little G.I. Joe partnership.
Yeah. That it's making me think of that star that used to come up. Oh my gosh, when I was watching Saturday morning cartoons, it was
Oh yeah.
What did you say? The more you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like swept across the sky. Yeah.
And there we go.
Totally.
Oh my gosh. Well, so Rachel, we always ask our guests to leave our listeners with a piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are no exception, because we know that since talking to you today that you have incredible advice to give our listeners. So is there one piece of advice that you would like to share with our listeners? And I'm even going to maybe funnel it to the role of knowledge building in this virtual space, because we are in this time right now. It just kind of makes sense. And that's what we've been talking about a whole lot today.
Yeah. I think if I could leave one piece of advice for this time, right, this time of virtual learning in all kinds of forms that looks, really painfully different, right, for so many of our kids and families, is decide where you can be a teacher and decide when you can be a teacher. And I think that's true for teachers, like my husband, like the virtual teachers who are figuring this out. And it's true for parents. So, just to think about like when and where you're teaching. Like I said, are you, are you holding like, really clear and high expectations, but for just like two things, right, in your virtual space as a teacher? Are you having those interesting conversations with your child in, even if you have 15 minutes with your kid because you're on the front lines and you're coming in and you're exhausted and you're just tucking them in? Like, can you ask 3 questions about what they experienced in Knowledge on the Go or in their virtual learning space? So I think my advice would be like, find those teachable moments, right? Because they're still there in this really, kind of rough and crazy moment. Like, there are teachable moments everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so how can we find them? Whether we're teachers on a screen doing virtual learning for the first time, for parents dealing with a lot of, expectations to be a teacher, just make a decision like, this is where and how I'm going to be a teacher right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to knowledge because, everyone has some particular point of knowledge that they can impart, right? You may not be an astrophysicist or a literary critic or a visual artist or, some of the things that we know we would send our kids to want to read and dig into deeper, but you can always ask a good question.
Yeah. You know what? I feel like I want to keep talking for a moment. I know normally we end right there, but so I'm going to share something, and Rachel, while I'm sharing, if you could like get your brain moving around. I know you have a little one. You have a high schooler, but you also have a younger one.
Yeah, I have a fourth grader and a 9th grader.
Yes, mm-hmm. And it's Lucy, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to share because I think it just would be so helpful for just like a tangible piece for folks listening. If you're a parent listening and you're not a teacher, like how we've managed this time working with kiddos who are learning in a virtual space. Mm-hmm. And Melissa, I'm not excluding you. I'm assuming that Elliot at one is not.
We're learning our colors right now, so we're
building a lot of knowledge right now. That incredible 1-year-old evolving brain.
Yeah. So I was thinking it might be helpful for us to share. Like, so when all this started happening, I kept thinking, okay, I'm going to do a schedule, and that's what Presley's school district sent home with an example, like 9 to 9:30. One subject, 9:30 to 9:45, break and snack, 9:45 to 10:15, another subject, 10:15 to 11, something else, 11 to 12 lunch. So for 3 full days, I tried to run the schedule. I won't even say that I ran it. I tried. Because, just for those listeners, I'm working full time too.
Yeah. Yeah.
While I'm trying to help my child, learn and, still be engaged in school and learning. And finally, I gave up midway through day 3. We all had a midday breakdown. And I decided that doesn't work for us. We're not doing it. And in the spirit that anything can be done, nothing is impossible, we decided on a must-do, may-do. And she had 3 things on her must-do, and 2 of them are knowledge on the go. And one of them, actually, you know what, she has 3 things, but one is kind of like has two subcategories. So she has knowledge on the go, and she does Eureka and Wit and Wisdom and Geodes. Mm-hmm. And then, and she reads Geodes to me, which makes her feel connected. So we can do that anytime. And then the second is, there's a little art class that a fabulous, fabulous teacher in Maryland, Rebecca Gyro. I don't know if you listen, I'm going to send this podcast to you. Your art classes have got us through. It's a half-hour
that's great.
Class, and it's on Facebook Live, and we tune in with, we call her Miss Rebecca, and she does a little art stuff every day that builds to this, picture at the end of the week. So there's a little theme. And then the third thing that she does is her soccer club does a soccer workout every day. And it's a half hour, and it's usually at noon. But she does that every day. And so by 1 or 2 o'clock, we're quote done with the day. And she's on to her may-dos, and she constructs those. I don't care what she does on the may-do. Have at it.
That's great. Yeah, she has choice.
Yeah, lots of choice, and that's kept us sane. So I was wondering if you had any tips, as a mom, that for our listeners that would just help bring sanity.
Yeah. I like everything in our world here. I really would say go to the text and go to the topics. So basically, like what I've done with Lucy is understand what she's doing. So her school's doing this amazing virtual learning, and, she's able to have access. And so I know that they're reading Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley Frankweller, one of my absolute favorite books ever. Yes. I know that they're studying like government structure, right? Like what's the Senate, what's the branch, what are the branches of government, what are checks and balances? And I know they're studying the human skeleton, right? So I know like 3 things that they are working on right now. So I just figured that out from, their daily, and asking, what are you reading right now? And, what are you doing in statistics? What are you doing in science? I don't really do a whole lot with math. I leave that to my Eureka colleagues. So I know that now. And so I'll just ask some questions, right? Back to my piece of advice, are you writing about Claudia? What do you think of Claudia? Is she glamorous, or is it an all act? And I happen to know the book. I know not everybody knows the book, but you just say what chapter did you read today? And, what's happening in that story? What do you think, so asking the question, and also if you can understand what the topics are, or the text, or what are the things, right, that they're studying, can you as a parent connect it to what they know? Because so here's a cognitive science thing for folks who didn't get the benefit of cognitive science classes in grad school. It's, we build, as I said earlier, knowledge builds on knowledge, right? Like the rich get richer. You keep building the more you know, right? Back to the theme of our podcast. So I know things that Lucy knows about the Met, which is where the characters in the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley Frankel are run away to, because we relocated from New York City a couple of years ago, but we used to go to the Met. I know a lot of things that Lucy knows about the Met. So I can just ask about that, because then it's building her schema around her knowledge of that text. I know what she knows about, the government. We talk a lot about politics in my family. I'm a little obsessed with it. So I know there are things she knows about, our senator and the current administration. So I just ask about some of those things that I know she knows. So if as a parent, you can just identify what are 3 things your kid is doing, ask a question every day about each of those things. It doesn't have to be a super rich, deep question. And then can you connect what they're learning to something they already know? And you know that because you're living the experience of being their mom or a dad or, caregiver. And that gets at a lot of things, right? It gets at you're building some knowledge about a topic, you're engaging them, there's conversation, which is critical. And then you're building out their schema. If you can say oh my God, do you remember that time you went to the Met and you got super freaked out that you had to finish your icy really fast because you can't bring an icy in the Met? Claudia goes in there with all this food and stuff, so can you build schema? Can you connect something they know? And those are, anybody can do that, right? You don't have to be super teacher. You certainly, like me, are not super mom. You're just asking questions about what they know and what they're studying. Mm-hmm. And if you're using knowledge on the go, you can see what they're studying. So as a parent, you can just go on and, okay, my 6th grader is reading this story about Arctic exploration. I don't know anything about Arctic exploration. What can you tell me, 6th grader? Who is the Shackleton guy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Read the back cover of the book. I mean,
yeah. Or you could listen to, since you pointed out all of our virtual teachers are reading aloud, you could listen to 2.5 seconds of the read aloud and just be like, hey, I heard Mr. Khair Butts reading this book about the Negro Baseball League. I don't know anything about that. When did it happen? Why did they start their own league? Who were these baseball players? And then let your child really teach you. Let them be your teacher.
Yeah.
That is great advice. And I'm just so thankful for you being on our podcast today, but also just to be partners with you from Baltimore City and just the support that you guys give to our teachers even before we were teaching from home, but also now to have this resource, and obviously to our thousands of students who have this as well. We really thank you.
Yeah, well, we thank you, because we know that, our teachers and our kids are it. They're the reason. And I know because Liz Nolis was on this podcast at one point and talked about, she's our director of implementation success. She talked about our belief in trusted colleague, that we meet you where you are. We know, and I think, that is something else that lived in Knowledge on the Go, that we know that we trust our colleagues. We want them to have some tools, but that our approach is always sort of centered on that, we have this partnership, we have this relationship. That's a huge part of how we operate all the time. So we love being in Baltimore too, Melissa. Thank you.
Yeah, and we know that I'm just so grateful that you're here. I agree. Teachers make the best tools and are able to adapt in every situation. So the fact you're providing them with such high quality stuff in this time is amazing. And I saw, this is totally a random story, but I saw on Facebook a teacher making a doc cam out of soup cans, and it made and her iPhone, her phone.
Adaptations. Yeah. And that's the thing, the team, as you said, they're teachers across the country. They're those incredible project managers I mentioned, Sarah Henchy, Sarah Turnage, Emily McKean. If you're listening, the team executes this vision with such precision and such care, because it's at the end of the day, they know that the kids out in Baltimore are watching this. They know that the teachers who are making their own document cameras with soup cans are out there. And so, they're very inspired to get up each day and do this. And hopefully when we're all back in classrooms, as you said, Melissa, there are things we'll learn, right? Always got to be a learner.
Absolutely.
That was so good. We just so appreciate you, and thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing everything that is forthcoming.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been such a joy talking with both of you. I feel very honored that I had the chance to connect with you and to reflect on this moment where we are in time.
Yeah, you're locked in. This is going to go down in history.
Well, it'll be interesting to go back and listen, right? When the world changes again, and reflect on kind of where we are right now, what that taught us
next week, or
right.
Who knows?
It changes quickly. Yeah.
So much, and we will definitely check back in at some point soon.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Melissa and Lori. You guys take care.
Thank you.
And tell Presley to keep asking those great questions.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.